Alright, now let's get the future part of this marathon started. Heading into the next generation with Insomniac's Ratchet and Clank Future, Tools of Destruction. I always did find the title of the series a bit odd. Future? I thought the series always took place in a futuristic world, and we're not that much farther in the timeline, so... Well, it might just be a carryover from the PS3 tech demo for Ratchet, built on the Resistance engine called Ratchet and Clank Future. This was to rebuild Metropolis on a grand scale using the power of the PS3, to prove that Insomniac could carry over the same quality from the PS2 to the next system and expand upon it. But yeah, Ratchet and Clank were the only PS2 mascots to make the jump to HD at first. Sly did later, but by a totally different company, as Sucker Punch went to work on Infamous, and Naughty Dog went to work on Uncharted. But Insomniac were sticking to the Lombax and Robot. And this would mark a big turning point in the series, not only for the jump in hardware, but Tools of Destruction would be a soft reboot for the series. Meaning everything that happened in the previous game still happens, but we were in a new galaxy altogether and we weren't continuing previous storylines. So this was made as a new jumping in point for the series. You didn't need to play any of the previous games before this one, and the game was released in 2007 for the PlayStation 3. It's also strangely the only PS3 Ratchet title not released for that PlayStation Now streaming service. By the way, is that any good? I don't hear anyone talk about it. People that have used it, sound off in the comments, I'm curious. Though can I mention, I always found this cover art really odd. Like Ratchet has his back to us and Clank is terrified of one normal enemy? I like the European cover art a little bit more. It is kind of crowded, but I think it's more accurate to the game. But honestly, I think the promotional poster was the best. It's cleaner overall, and I kind of wish it was the cover for the game. But that's enough for the development history. I am long overdue to talk about this part of the franchise. These games are much more story-driven than previous entries, so in order to talk about them in detail, I need to talk about spoilers. If you want to play the games for yourself, skip to the time I'm about to show in a little bit. If not, it's time to dive into the future. So we catch back up with Ratchet and Clank, who receive a distress signal from Captain Quark that he's being attacked by an army of commandos, and the two go to lend a hand. But the invaders specifically start to target Ratchet above all else. They end up meeting the one behind the invasion, Emperor Percival Tachyon, who's out to rule the galaxy and wipe out Ratchet as he's the last remaining Lombax. I'll get more onto that later. And the Lombaxes were responsible for wiping out Tachyon's race, the Kragmites, years ago in something known as the Great War. Ratchet and Clank dethroned Tachyon. And make their escape. Meanwhile, throughout their time evading enemy forces, Clank starts to see these small creatures known as the Zoni, who give him visions of the future and refer to Clank as their sire. Though Ratchet can't see them and he starts to question if Clank's okay in the head. Quark ends up getting captured, but acts as a mole on the inside for Ratchet and Clank, as he's acting as Tachyon's confidant. Which lead them to discovering that Tachyon is after something known as the Lombax Secret, which is the weapon that supposedly vaporized the Kragmites years ago, and rumors suggest it's on the Apogee space station. Ratchet and Clank make their way there, but they get ambushed by two robots, Kronk and Zephyr, as well as Talwin and Apogee, who threatens to throw Ratchet out into space until realizing he's a Lombax. The group start talking about the Lombax secret, but the station years ago was raided by space pirates. Talon's father, Max Apogee, went to retrieve what was lost, but never came back. The group decides to go after the pirates since Ratchet and Clank have had encounters with them throughout their invasion of Tachyon, and after retrieving the missing artifact stolen by Captain Slag and his first mate Rusty Pete, they discover coordinates for the planet Raycon 5, and plot course for there. Once there, they find a Lombax hideout that has information on the Lombax secret, referred to now as the Dimensionator, which speaks of having something to do with interdimensional travel. The group goes searching for the Dimensionator based on the findings in the base, but they run into the plumber from previous games, who claims that a device capable of wiping out the Kragmites doesn't exist. Clank then theorizes that the Kragmites were removed rather than killed. Oh, and the plumber gives them an old washer. This is plot relevant, I swear. Quark then finds information relating to the supercomputer known as Iris, that has all of the galaxy's known information. Unfortunately, it's right in the middle of Slag's territory, so the duo raid the base so they can use Iris. While using the supercomputer, they learn that Tachyon survived the Great War as an egg that was raised by the Lombaxes. However, when Tachyon learned of his true origins, he waged war against the Lombaxes, leading to their vanishing. The Dimensionator is currently residing on the planet Jacindu, but Iris ends up losing power before answering Ratchet's questions. Clank insists that the two go to Zordum after getting a vision that Talon was trapped there, with Ratchet very begrudgingly coming along as he still doubts the Zoni's existence. The two end up freeing her, but she's confused by the fact that she never said their location to them, having Ratchet realize that Clank has been telling the truth about the Zoni the whole time. The duo make their way to the Dimensionator and find it, but get interrupted by Slag's crew who threaten to kill Clank if they don't give the device back, because Clank decided to not be a backpack for this scene. But that doesn't last too long, as they slay Slag, causing Ratchet to be the new head of the crew. But really all you want is the Dimensionator. Ratchet and Clank argue on whether they should destroy the Dimensionator or not, as its power could be too dangerous, but Quark ends up taking the Dimensionator and plans on throwing it into a black hole. But his bot ends up going to the Kragmite homeworld, basically gift wrapping it for Tachyon. Tachyon then uses the Dimensionator to bring back the Kragmites who were banished and starts to wreak havoc. During this process, Ratchet and Clank are separated. Ratchet ends up meeting with the others but can't find Clank, and is regretful for not setting things right with him. For about a minute, and then Clank is safe and sound. The two fight off Tachyon's new invasion and make their way to Fastoon after Clank receives another vision of the Zoni, with Ratchet going no questions asked. After breaking into the stronghold, Tachyon reveals that the Lombaxes used the Dimensionator to flee from Tachyon's revolt, with only two Lombaxes staying behind, the keeper of the Dimensionator and his infant son being Ratchet. Tachyon killed Ratchet's father, but not before Ratchet was sent to Veldin to keep him hidden. Tachyon opens a portal to the Lombaxes and offers Ratchet a chance to leave and be with his own kind. Knowing that Tachyon will pillage the Polaris Galaxy, Ratchet decides to stay behind and destroy the Dimensionator. Tachyon fights back, but the Dimensionator mid-fight sends the ruler and the duo into subspace, with Ratchet and Clank defeating the Kragmite. But Tachyon declares that only he knows Ratchet's true purpose and real name, and vows that the Kragmites will return again as he's sucked into the dimensional void. The Dimensionator is damaged, with the only fix being a washer, I told you that'd be relevant, and the two repair it and use the Dimensionator to head back home and return safe and sound. The Dimensionator is no longer operational, but a portal opens up with the Zoni, now allowing everyone to see them, arriving down saying Clank is ready to fulfill his purpose and whisk him away, with Ratchet being left behind and having no clue where to find him, ending Tools of Destruction. So as far as the story goes, well, I do like the world building that they do in the Polaris Galaxy. This place feels like it's been through a lot and feels like it's been around for a much longer time than the previous galaxies. It's also much more lawless as you're dealing with smugglers, pirates. It gives off a totally different vibe than the previous games, and I enjoy that. It's one of the things that made stuff like Deadlock really stand out, and this game in a very similar way. But I think the overall plot of the game kinda keeps losing focus throughout. Like, the main story doesn't really get going until we actually get to the Dimensionator, but that's the third act of the game. A big deal is made out of the Kragmites' return, but they only attack one city and then you're on the final boss planet. I was honestly shocked when the final boss started because I thought the story was building up to more. The Kragmite return somehow feels even more inconsequential than Nefarious turning everyone into robots. I wish that the people in the galaxy were more endearing as well. This game focuses on a much more centralized cast than the people you would meet on each individual planet. While I like that idea in concept, I'm pretty neutral to most of these guys. The only one I think I ended up really liking was the smuggler. He keeps looking out for himself, even dropping you out of his ship so he can avoid capture, but he ends up selling you different gadgets throughout the game, and in a way he's kind of like Moneybags from the Spyro series, just somehow more likable despite his occupation. But people like Pete, Kronk, and Zephyr, I have no real thoughts on them, they're just kinda there. And man, this game really needs to pick one or the other with its two main villains, Captain Slag and Tachyon, or at least have the two parties interact more. I think back to Ratchet 2 with the Thief, Megacorp, and Thugs for Less. The groups would interact far more about the Protopet, and would actively get in each other's way, or would team up for a common goal. But here there's nothing like that. They both revolve around the Dimensionator, but they never get in each other's way. You'd think they would, but no, they're completely separate plotlines. Out of the two, I would say I preferred Slag. He had much more presence and got in your way a lot more throughout the game, and in my opinion, he was a bigger threat. But he does end up feeling more like a side villain because he only really wants the Dimensionator because it's a treasure and that's about it. Slag could be taken out of this story and not much would change. And Tachyon, man, he is such an underwhelming villain and somehow is just as there as Otto from Size Matters. He's a character that I think desperately needed more screen time. We have his backstory about how he was raised and later revolted, but that's all we get in terms of his development. And you barely interact with the guy. You meet him at the start, and then the next time you meet him is right before he summons the Cragmites. That means he's gone for like 2/3 of the game. And after that, you meet him for the final boss. That's a whole 3 times you meet him for this game's main villain. True, you didn't meet characters like Drek until the final boss, but Drek was always your main villain, but the infobots and scenes with him kept his presence intact and made him more of a threat. Tachyon shows up for a few infobots at the start, but not nearly enough, and he's more of a background element in Planets. Most of the mid-game is dominated by Slag, with Tachyon coming in to close things out, and also Tachyon is played way too much for comedy. It's the problem that I had with Nefarious and Ratchet 3 only amplified. I'm not against the comic relief villain, but it's always a tricky slope, and I think he needs to have a true state of power as well. You can have both. Drek and Vox had both, and that's why I think they're great villains in my eyes. Not to mention, I don't think Tachyon's comedic moments land, like, at all. I think they wanted to try and make a parallel between Ratchet and Tachyon, considering the history of their races, but again, since they barely interact, it kind of falls flat. Like, the fact that he killed Ratchet's father and it's just skimmed over really sums it up in all honesty. Sadly, I was also pretty underwhelmed by Talon, and I wanted to like her a lot more. A treasure hunter slash researcher who's on your side, and has a good baseline for a backstory. She seemed like a really cool addition to the crew, but sadly after the initial encounter, that's all you kinda get with her, and she doesn't really get any kind of development, or feels that tied to any event. Which is weird, you'd think she'd be more involved with Slag considering her father's encounters with the space pirates. But no, nothing. She doesn't even join you when you find a Dimensionator on the planet that Iris says, you know, her father was researching? I think she needs to be more active in the plot, because the plot just kinda puts her to the side. Angela Cross, she ain't. Speaking of Angela, this is something that has always bugged me ever since my first playthrough. Since I didn't really do spoiler stuff back when I was doing my Going Commando review, that thief who wanted the Protopet is actually a woman named Angela Cross, who's a Lombax. Can you figure out what my issue is? Angela is never addressed once in the whole story despite the fact that she's a Lombax, which feels like a glaring inconsistency to me. Like, did Tachyon just not care, or was she killed off screen at least? Hand wave that or something! I know that might seem like a nitpick, but she was a pivotal character in a mainline game. And it's one of those things in the story I have to back up and just go, wait, hold on, what? There is a newscast on a radio station in A Crack in Time that says she met up with Max Apogee at one point, and that her status is currently unknown. But I think that's something you need to address in this game, not 2 games down the line. Plus, the whole Lombax thing in general just kinda rubs me the wrong way. Ratchet never showed signs that he was really worried about his race, nor did anyone comment that he was the last Lombax out there. This was just a guy who wanted to get off his backwater planet and see the galaxy, who ended up becoming a hero along the way. So it's suddenly being a big issue out of nowhere, and the Lombaxes being these great heroes and inventors for eons, and Ratchet being their sole survivor, chosen one. To me, it feels like a cheap way to make Ratchet more important and add weight to a story that doesn't have many stakes to begin with. That's why stuff like Tachyon saying that he knows Ratchet's true name and him killing Ratchet's father don't really land, because it's all being thrown in this game and not enough time is spent on it, nor does it really feel that consistent. And that's far from the only thing in the plot that felt forced to me, like Slag only getting the Dimensionator because Clank wasn't on Ratchet's back for one scene. It feels like it was there just so Slag could have the Dimensionator. Or the entirety of the Zoni. They just kinda come out of nowhere and help Clank, and it doesn't really fit with anything else in the game. I know of their importance in later titles, but here they do nothing to add to this story. If anything, they're at the root of one of the bigger issues I have with the plot. That being the whole thing where Clank keeps getting visions of the future and telling Ratchet, But Ratchet just can't believe that and decides to be a total ass to Clank for it. Yeah, it's back to the Ratchet 1 problem, where their fighting in the mid part of the game just feels so petty. But even then, Ratchet had a more valid reason to be angry in that game. I mean, the person he looked up to, his idol, turned out to be completely corrupt. That would get to ya. It was Ratchet taking it all out on Clank that didn't really feel justified. But here, these two have been on 4 Insomniac-made adventures with one another. They clearly are close now. So Ratchet thinking Clank is just crazy in regard to the Zoni, when it's clear they're giving him new tools to help in situations, just doesn't sit well with me. And in later titles, the Zoni flat out help Ratchet. And it's an even weirder inconsistency because they're time creatures. But in here, they just keep invisible to Ratchet the entire game. And the fact that they can be seen by everybody at the last scene of the game really makes this entire sequence feel unnatural. It felt like the entire point of having them here in the plot was to make the two fight for the sake of making them fight. You can have them argue with one another and still have interesting dynamics, but this isn't the way to do it. It also doesn't help whenever they have this kind of fight, Clank is always the one in the right. Every time. I know he's the more logical one between the two, but it really felt like this entire plotline we were just going around in circles with stuff we've already seen from these two, and was easily the low point of the story for me. I think Tools of Destruction has a lot of cool ideas it sets into place, but it really needed to tie them together better and pick and choose which ones they really wanted to develop, because it feels spread too thin and makes the story not really mean much in the end. It's a lot of setup for later games without being a fulfilling story on its own. And that was Tools of Destruction. Overall, wait, what? What? You mean that was just a story? We still got more to go through? Oh boy. So to talk about the actual game, the presentation is a pretty big deal for this title. This was the series' jump to HD after all, and I think they made the transition really well. Back then, it was easily considered the best looking PS3 game on the market, kind of like how Ratchet PS4 was to that system when it came out too. And I still think the game graphically holds up great. Kirwan alone shows off what this game was trying to do with a redone Metropolis, to do what the PS2 games did, but on a much larger scale and scope, and the environment still looked great. Though I do think there could have been a little bit more variety of the planets because they do blend together a lot. Not helping that is how dark the contrast can be at times. On some planets, I had to turn up my TV's brightness because it was so difficult to see. Character animation is still on point, and a bit more cartoony I'd say, but not enough to be distracting, just the right amount. The new character designs are great and give off a familiar vibe to the original series, but still feel like their own thing. Like Talwyn probably being my favorite new character design hands down. Though I feel like this model of Ratchet is starting to show its age, and doesn't feel as clean as the PS2 days. And on a side note, I'm not really a fan of a lot of his armors this time. I honestly think his first outfit is his best one, which is really weird to say for a Ratchet game. The voice acting is the series standard, which is great, and new characters slip right in.
My mother was half Lombax.
Wait, whoa, hold on, what?
Almost didn't recognize you in high def.
Okay, yeah, there's no way I can't talk about this. So any pre-rendered scene in the game is fine, and a lot of them are really fun updates to the Infobot style of scenes. But the in-game cutscenes will constantly have their audio skip, so the cutscene and the audio are no longer in sync. It can be up to like 2 to 5 seconds behind, and this happened for like 80% of the cutscenes, I'm not even joking. It's all kinds of distracting and takes me completely out of it. Just noting, I didn't take that into account when reviewing the actual story, but yeah, there's no way you're getting the proper intention of the story with this happening. I used 2 different PS3s, 2 different physical copies, and a digital copy, reinstalled the game multiple times, and each and every time this issue persisted, so I know it's consistent. When trying to research this issue, it seemed to all be relating around later versions of the PS3, and that on the original PS3, it runs fine. So if you're planning to play the game for yourself, I honestly recommend watching the cutscenes online first, and then playing the game, so you can experience the story proper, cause with this, I just can't overlook this issue, I'm sorry. And honestly, I'm shocked this is something Insomniac never patched out or anything like that. and it doesn't help that the cutscene scripting is just merely okay. A lot of the dialogue doesn't feel as natural as it did back in the PS2, nor did I find it that funny. I think the only 2 jokes I laughed at were this.
The weapon used to vaporize the Cragmites was a hat. Oh, come on. There's no way a Lombax would invent something that ridiculous.
Oh, really? What about your nuclear-powered rocket sled? Your antimatter bathroom buddy? And let us not forget about the electroshock undergarments you invented last fall.
Stunderwear. Huge seller on Umbris.
And this.
Did you call us here for a reason, or are you just trying to get us killed?
Can it be both?
Those were the only 2 jokes I laughed at, but most of the other ones just didn't work for me. But what did work for me? This soundtrack. Oh man, I forgot how good Tools of Destruction's OST was. It carries the same energy as the previous games, mainly going commando, and elevates the scale much more. Kerwan's theme alone is a testament to that, but the other tracks like the spaceflight, the arena, the Pirate's Bay carry the same tone. Give the OST a listen, it's great stuff and adds a lot to each situation. Though the random disco music in the credits feels a little out of place considering what just happened. So I think Tools of Destruction for the most part feels like the Ratchet and Clank you know and love presentation wise, but still has its own twist on it, though some parts have definitely aged worse than others, but is that true for the gameplay as well? So gameplay is pretty much the series norm. Go to planets, blow stuff up, get to the new planet, yada yada. Honestly, gameplay wise, there's only a few minor tweaks since the big focus was the HD transition for this one. Your weapons level up like normal, but you also have a new skill tree system for every weapon using Raritanium, which you can find at various points in the game. Using these can unlock these nodes on a grid that can allow you to do more damage, have more ammo, make more bolts drop, etc. Surround this mystery symbol and you can unlock a special perk for the weapon. The only other change regarding to weapons is how the Rhino 4 is handled. Before, you would just need to buy the thing, usually for around 1,000,000 bolts. But now it's split up into 13 hollow plants scattered throughout the game that you need to collect and bring to the smuggler, who will then build it for you for free. But besides weapons and armor, there's now a third thing you can buy: devices. These are a series of one-use items you can use for defensive purposes, such as the Groovatron, which can force your enemies to stop in place and dance, and Mr. Zircon, a bad-tempered little robot that can assist you in battle. But aside from that, it's typical Ratchet stuff. You got arenas that you can use to grind, a wide open hunting ground you can use to farm bolts, Clank sections with these little zony creatures instead of the gadget bots, some ship segments that come up time to time, and besides some gadgets that you can use like the Gelinator to create platforms, the decryptor that you use for this game's door puzzles, where you guide a ball to connecting points, and a hollow guys to use for infiltration, that's about it. But let's see what's on the good side of the coin. So the good in Tools of Destruction. Well, first off, I want to say that the gameplay and such was still left intact and is the same kind of spirit as the PS2 era. A lot of series did not make a smooth transition to HD at the start of this generation, so the fact that Ratchet and Clank proved they could still hang in there is something worth pointing out. I really like the more grandiose sense of scale. Like I already mentioned Kerwan, but this game loves having Ratchet and Clank zip by huge set pieces. All with the score blaring in the background, you constantly hear enemies getting more worried the farther you go. It helps a lot. And even though I'm not a big fan of the actual story, I do like the fact that they are focusing more on story. It feels like a good fit for the series. The skill tree setup for the weapons is a nice idea on how you can add further growth to the weapons besides just using them normally. Make some of the weapons more your money makers with the small fry, give your big damage dealers more firepower, having weapons with small ammo get more. It adds a nice layer of depth and customization that is welcomed. The arenas are still fun, leveling up your weapons is still great. We're kind of at the point of the series now where I'm just repeating what makes every Ratchet and Clank game fun. So now it's on what each individual game does to stand out from the others. And this one, well... Unfortunately, Tools of Destruction has some pretty noticeable downsides, and a lot of them come with the game trying to experiment more. First off, this game has a lot of sections where they want you to use the 6-axis controller. This was the beginning of the PS3 era after all. You use it to move Ratchet around in the air, fly up and down, do puzzles. Thankfully, Insomniac had the foresight to let you turn this off, but it doesn't change the fact of them being here, and just kinda getting in the way of the pace. I mean, the glider is alright, mainly when you can use it in the sandbox area, when you can have some more fun with the mobility, and halo jumps, I mean, that's just a carryover from Ratchet 3. But destroying walls feels kinda tacked on, and the decryptor isn't that fun of a door puzzle. It's okay, but you really can't go through this one particularly fast, and it just kinda drags on. And you wanna know what also drags on? These flying segments where you get ambushed by slag. Unlike previous entries, these are all on rails, and they just flat out last longer than they should. It's not very interesting, and they don't have enough energy to make them fun. And they do not hold up well on repeats or challenge mode. Clank sections are also part of the game I'm really not a fan of. It's the same as it's always been, just using Zoni instead of gadget bots. I mean, you have a slow down time button, but let's be real, you're just kind of holding that down for the entire time. I've played this kind of section so many times already, and it adds nothing new to the table. Like, Ratchet's gameplay has kept advancing, while Clank's has just kind of felt stagnant, and it really shows here. It doesn't help that I just played Secret Agent Clank before this, and even the Gadgetbot levels in that game felt better than these. The game also has quite a number of technical problems. I mean, I already mentioned the sound issues in the cutscenes, but there were a few times where I would randomly die for no reason. Like me dying when I was trying to go meet up with Kronk and Zephyr. Or in the pirate base level, I just died in this transition cutscene twice. But probably the worst for me, the game crashed not once, not twice, but 3 times during my playthrough, all in back-to-back sessions. Not even Deadlocked when I was trying to tax that game to its limits crashed on me. I gotta say the name Tools of Destruction is kind of ironic, because I didn't find the weapon selection that great, honestly. It's not as bad as Say Size Matters, but it's pretty uninspired, honestly. I mean, a flamethrower, a rocket launcher, a turret, you've used these multiple times in the series already, and they don't feel that great either. Like, a lot of them lack impact and feedback when using them, and just feel kind of bland and really underpowered. Even the Rhino maxed out, while powerful, just kinda lacks that fun factor to use, and it's honestly one of my least favorite super weapons in the series. The only weapons I can really think that I enjoyed were the magnet launcher, since you can lock foes into place making them easy pickings, and this alpha disruptor, you charge this thing up. Now that's a tool of destruction, alright. But those were the only ones I really had fun using, and there were 3 weapons I kinda consider duds in this game. First would be these Razor Claws, which you're supposed to use as a melee weapon like, say, the Plasma Whip. But their range is pathetic, and without the magnet launcher, it's borderline unusable, because you have to get right next to the enemy where you're more likely to take damage instead. The second are the Plasma Beasts, which are supposed to be like a mine kind of weapon, but they do so little damage I didn't even bother with them. It felt like I was playing Size Matters again, honestly. And finally, the Tornado Launcher, which fires out a tornado that barely does any damage, and you control it with the 6-axis. Why? You can power them up to make them a bit better with the whole skill tree system, but that has its own set of issues, like how there's not nearly enough Raritanium. I kept running out of it all the time, and didn't have nearly enough to get to the more juicy parts of the skill tree. By the time I was getting close to that, the weapon reached its max level. And in Ratchet and Clank, it's not a great idea to use a weapon a lot if it can't gain more experience. So that made the upgrade system not as rewarding since you couldn't really reap the benefits until challenge mode. And then there's the whole devices system in the game. While a few of them are really helpful like the Leech Bomb, Groovatron, and Mr. Zircon, they don't gain experience, so I didn't feel compelled to bust them out that much. Later in the series, these would just become straight up weapons, which feels more natural. And if I'm honest, even the ones I mentioned aren't really that special. Mr. Zircon, besides his quips, is a glorified Agent of Doom from previous games. Leech Bomb is just a health refill, and the Groovatron, while a cute idea, is the kind of thing I feel is funny one time and then I'm kind of null to it after. Speaking of the Groovatron and Leech Bomb, I think these two have a bigger problem with the game overall. Because I think Insomniac knew that these two were so powerful. I mean, getting health back and just stopping enemies outright, including bosses, that they made the game quite a bit harder to compensate. Also, this game is kinda stingy with checkpoints, mainly on the pirate bases where I always felt like they were a little too spaced out. Now, unlike say Size Matters, you do have enough in your kit to play defensive, but I feel like in this game you have to do that far more than previous entries, where you could be either A or B about it. Though I think the worst of the checkpointing is the Kurchu boss fight, because you gotta do this whole rail grind section that lasts about 3 minutes, and if you die, you have to redo this entire part all over again. I didn't think Insomniac would pull a Luna, like seriously, why? Okay, it's not nearly as bad as that, but it's the principle of the thing, you know? Just start it at the boss proper for a retry. I know this review is coming off very negative, but I want to state, I had a fun time with Tools of Destruction. It's just, the stuff that makes this game fun is the stuff I've already talked about in Ratchet and Clank several times. Which in a way is kind of the game's biggest problem. Tools of Destruction as a game is still a fun time. The worlds you go to are interesting and full of life. The weapon-using platforming action of the series is here and accounted for. It checks off all the marks that make Ratchet and Clank, well, Ratchet and Clank. In its own vacuum, the game is still a solid platformer. When I compare it to the rest of the series, however, I think it starts to fall short. In my eyes, it lacks an identity of sorts, because there's nothing I can really point to and say, oh, I want to replay Tools of Destruction because of this. Is it the story? Not really. I don't find it that compelling or focused. I think something like Going Commando, Deadlocked, or even the first Ratchet and Clank have it beat there. The weapon lineup and gameplay? I've had more fun in previous Insomniac titles. The humor, considering I hardly laugh, no. You see what I'm getting at? I have no reason to recommend or play Tools of Destruction over every other Insomniac Ratchet and Clank game. Even Secret Agent Clank if I'm being totally honest. Cause that has stuff I would easily go back to, and even after finishing that title I went back to do challenge mode for a bit because I had a really fun time. This one, it's kind of a one and done for me. And in a series where one of its biggest advantages is the replay value, that's kind of glaring. Okay, let's make something clear. It's not something like Size Matters, where I felt like the game was just not designed well at all. It's more that I feel like Tools of Destruction was great for its time, but now it's just kind of an okay game. But when Insomniac has set the bar for the series so high previously, its elders just outclass it. It may say Future in the title, but it can't keep up with its past. I know there are definitely people that are not gonna agree with my opinion, but that's just kind of how I feel. Also, oh my gosh, this video was long. I haven't done a video like this in a long time. Makes me really fear for what the Crack in Time video length is gonna be. Anyway, next time we have a bit of a shorter adventure, so we're gonna be looking at Ratchet and Clank Future, Quest for Booty. I'll see you then.